Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a really deep dive into the fascinating biology and psychology of our internal alarm systems. Have you ever wondered why some people just seem to breeze through life without a care in the world, while others are constantly battling this quiet storm of worry? Well, it turns out it's not just a personality quirk. It is deeply, deeply rooted in our biology.
Let's picture this. You're walking into a massive room to give a presentation to a huge crowd. Or, maybe it's a high-stakes job interview. For some folks, this exact scenario makes them feel absolutely thrilled. They're energized, focused, ready to crush it. But for others, walking into that exact same room makes them feel physically sick. We're talking heart racing, palms sweating, mind going completely blank. Literally two totally different reactions to the exact same high-stakes scenario. So, same room, same stakes. Why such a completely different experience? To figure this out, we've got to pop the hood. We need to explore both the biological hardware and the psychological software of our minds. We're going to look at exactly why our brains react this way and how some people somehow manage to keep their internal alarms so incredibly quiet.
All right, Section 1, the Threat Anticipation System.
To really understand the anxious brain, we first need to normalize what this system is actually built for. At its core, anxiety is just a threat anticipation system. It's literally your brain running simulations about the future to prepare you for danger. So the absolutely crucial point here is that anxiety isn't a glitch in the matrix. It's an incredibly adaptive biological function. I mean, in small doses, it keeps you alive, right? It makes you look both ways before crossing the street. But for some of us, this life-saving system gets cranked up way too loud. It starts running threat simulations for just everyday normal events, and that is when it becomes debilitating.
Which brings us to Section 2, the biology of worry. Okay. Let's dive into this. Let's look at the literal hardware inside your head driving all of this.
Inside your head, there's this constant tug-of-war taking place. On one side, you've got the amygdala. Think of this as your brain's blaring fire alarm. On the other side, you have the prefrontal cortex. That's the logical, regulating part of your brain that basically acts like the off switch. Now, in an anxious brain, studies actually show the amygdala is overactive. It fires off way too easily. And to make matters worse, the prefrontal regulation, that off switch, is weaker. So the alarm is absolutely blaring, and the guy holding the off switch just isn't strong enough to press it down.
And this brain alarm doesn't just stay in your head. It echoes throughout your entire body, through what's known as the HPA axis response. It works like a chain reaction. Step 1, your hypothalamus detects a threat. Step 2, it sends a signal down to the pituitary gland. Step 3, that signals your adrenal glands to flood your system with cortisol, the stress hormone. Now, in an anxious person, this whole entire system is hypersensitive. Not only does it trigger this massive cascade of cortisol way faster, but it is also so much slower to return to baseline. So long after that presentation or interview is over, your body is literally still swimming in stress hormones.
So, you might be wondering, are you just born with this hyperactive alarm? Is it set in stone? Well, twin studies show you can inherit a predisposition. About 30 to 40%, let's call it 35% of your anxiety baseline is genetic. But the much bigger piece of the pie, that remaining 65%, is actually driven by your environment. We're talking about things like early childhood adversity, attachment insecurity, or learned helplessness. And what you should really take away from this is incredibly empowering. Biology definitely plays a role, sure, but it is absolutely not your destiny.
Let's quickly touch on the chemical messengers that run this hardware, because lowering that amygdala reactivity is partly just a chemical balancing act. First up, we have GABA. GABA provides fast-acting regulation. It's kind of like slamming the brakes on your nervous system, and it's exactly what medications like benzodiazepines target. Serotonin, on the other hand, offers a much slower, long-term modulation, which is why SSRIs are so commonly prescribed. But remember, and this is key, we don't just have to rely on pills to change this chemical balance.
Section 3, the fear of fear. Because now that we understand the biological hardware, we really need to talk about the psychological software glitches that amplify everything.
At the absolute core of the anxious mind is this concept called the intolerance of uncertainty. And it's fascinating. The anxious brain doesn't just dislike not knowing what's going to happen next. It actually finds the unknown inherently threatening. If you don't know the exact outcome of a situation, your brain just automatically assumes the absolute worst to try and protect you. This intolerance is a massive, massive psychological driver of anxiety.
And that leads us directly into what's known as the worry paradox. Because let's be real, worry feels a lot like problem solving, doesn't it?
You sit there analyzing every single possible bad outcome, thinking you're doing a great job preparing yourself. But here is the vital takeaway. Worrying is highly counterproductive. It tricks us. It tricks us into feeling productive, while in reality, it just activates your threat system without ever actually resolving the threat. You are essentially just pouring gasoline straight under your biological alarm fire.
And man, this can quickly spiral into what's known as anxiety sensitivity. This is a trait that measures how much you fear the physical sensations of anxiety themselves. And this right here is exactly how high-functioning people get trapped managing constant internal noise. Think about it. You notice your heart racing, and because you have high anxiety sensitivity, you start panicking about your racing heart. It creates this relentless fear loop that just amplifies your anxiety tenfold. Before we can start rewiring this system, we have to accurately diagnose the problem.
Section 4. Stress versus anxiety. We need to look at two very distinct states.
You hear a lot of people use these words totally interchangeably, right? But biologically speaking, they are entirely different beasts. Stress is triggered by an external pressure. Think of a looming project deadline, and the stress ends the second that threat passes. Anxiety, however, is an internal threat simulation. It persists even when there's absolutely no identifiable real-world threat in front of you. Distinguishing between these two is absolutely vital for treatment, because if the real-world threat is completely gone, but your alarm is still ringing, well, then you're dealing with anxiety.
Section 5. Rewiring your anxious brain. This is where things get really exciting, folks. Let's talk about how we can actually bridge the gap between an anxious brain and a calm brain.
Let's start with your vagus nerve. Having what's called high vagal tone is associated with much better emotional regulation. On the flip side, low vagal tone means you're operating with a much higher baseline of anxiety. Your vagal tone is basically your body's ability to relax after a stressful event, and it's closely linked to your heart rate variability. And the brilliant part about all of this, you can physically raise your vagal tone. You can create a calmer baseline through deliberate practices like slow breathing exercises or physical activity. You are quite literally training your body's braking system.
Building right on that, let's look at the evidence-based tools we can use to rewrite the software. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is absolutely fantastic for challenging those catastrophic thoughts and short-circuiting that worry paradox we talked about earlier. Exposure therapy helps desensitize the alarm system. Mindfulness literally trains your brain to tolerate uncertainty. And whatever you do, do not underestimate physical exercise. The research here is wild. It shows regular exercise reduces cortisol so effectively that it can work just as well as medication for mild to moderate cases. Round the whole shebang out with adequate sleep, and you've got yourself a seriously powerful toolkit to lower your anxiety baseline.
Understanding anxiety is the beginning of managing it. I really want you to let that sink in for a second. If you're watching this explainer right now, and you're recognizing yourself in these concepts, please know this: you are not broken. Okay? You simply have a slightly overprotective, highly efficient biological alarm system. And now that you actually know how the hardware and the software operate, you actually have the power to recalibrate it. So I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. If anxiety is really just your brain running a threat simulation, how will you choose to rewrite the software today? Seriously, think about those tools we just covered. Whether it's challenging your inner narrative or simply just going for a run to clear out that cortisol, you can take control of the simulation. If you found this explainer helpful and you want to keep exploring with us, hit that subscribe button. We decode the plain science of your